Welcome to this month's episode of Talking Point, where we delve more deeply into the issues relating to women's sport and women in sport. I'm your host, Lisa Ingarfield, and I hope that I can provoke deeper thought and encourage you to think about this conversation in your communities and really extend it beyond the individual to the system. Last month in our Talking Point episode, we chatted with Jessica Luther about women and sports media. We touched on how women are marginalized in the media, both in terms of the opportunities that they have and how they are treated. Today, we're going to continue the conversation, and we are lucky enough to have Nancy Hogshead-Makar, and she is going to focus in particular on sexual abuse and the work being done to prevent it and educating our communities, coaches, athletes, parents, to shift the culture around sexual abuse in sport. Nancy is a 1984 Olympic gold medalist swimmer. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Champion Women, an organization that provides legal advocacy for girls and women in sports. She's also a civil rights attorney who has successfully represented athletes in precedent-setting legislation and is one of the nation's foremost experts on gender equity in sports. Well, welcome to the show, Nancy. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us at Talking Point today. We're excited to hear from you.
Well, thank you for having me on, Lisa. I really appreciate it.
So why don't we begin by having you share with us your reasons for beginning Champion Women and the kinds of activities that you all do at Champion Women.
Sure. Well, I was a civil rights lawyer and a professor of law for many years, and I really saw that sort of for the rest of my career, my highest and best use is being able to work on a policy level with different issues related to women in sports. And, I could have done the individual cases and made more money, but I really thought that, I would be able to move the needle more if I worked on the policy type thing. So as an example, we've got a big project right now dealing with athletics, just pure athletic departments, making sure that they have the same, the right proportion of women athletes who are participating to get the same scholarship dollars and the same recruiting dollars, and the coaches are paid the same, et cetera. We've got a very big project going on there. And then we do a lot of pregnancy discrimination. We do a lot of employment discrimination, which usually includes LGBT work as well. There are very few out lesbian coaches out there, which is really sad. And then we do a lot of sexual harassment work, both in schools and in the separately in the club and Olympic sports arena, where there is very little that I as an attorney can do to help somebody who's been molested by their coach. In schools, I really have a lot of tools at my disposal. In club and Olympic sports, I really don't.
So the reason for that is because folks who are in club sports and Olympic sports are neither an employee or a student. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So employees are covered by Title VII, which bars discrimination based on race or sex or religion or national origin. And then students are covered by Title IX, which says that you can't discriminate based on sex if a school receives federal funds. So yeah, students and employees are pretty well covered, but athletes who are not part of a school program, right? They walk across the street and, the parents think it's roughly the same. And I'm here to tell you, it is not.
Right.
Most club sport athletes, the parents sign a waiver that say that they won't sue. Just as one, they have very little insurance. They usually do not have a general counsel position. They usually, they're just not that sophisticated. That's a money-making organization that really doesn't want to have to deal with sexual abuse and is not sort of in it to make it safer for the next kid, if you will.
Yeah, and so a lot of this behavior is left unchecked, it sounds like, and athletes in these situations don't really know where to turn, I imagine.
Exactly. I mean, if you think about it sort of from a reverse perspective of, if you really wanted to molest kids, where would you go? Well, you would go someplace that was unregulated. You would go someplace where you had absolute authority over these kids. And when you said jump, they had to say how high. Mm-hmm. And you break down the barriers that normally exist between adult and child so that you set them up perfectly to be able to molest. Right. So that's and then again, like, insurance companies usually do a good job of making sure that if they're going to insure the organization, that there are protections, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have insurance, as many of these clubs have way too little, then that's like another oversight that you don't normally have.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, there was. I'm in the state of Colorado, and I know that a couple of legislative seasons ago, or it has repetitively appeared, has been an attempt to regulate club sports in a more defined way. And one of the requests has been that coaches have to go through background checks. Mm-hmm. And I recognize that background checks will not on their own end sexual abuse in athletics. However, it's one piece of the pie, right? It doesn't solve it, but it can be helpful. Mm-hmm. But that has failed consistently at the state legislature because folks are wary of requiring background checks that parents or people in your community would then have access to. And so they're framing it as a violation of privacy, right?
Oh, my gosh.
And so it's pretty interesting to me how when you talk about the system, right, and how our systems respond to any attempt to protect or to regulate young people, particularly women and girls who we know are very vulnerable to sex abuse, and the pushback gets framed as a privacy issue. No, that's a coach power issue more than a privacy issue, because look, I as an attorney am very well regulated. Of course, I had to have a background check done on me before I can be an attorney. Same with being a teacher. Same with being a physician. Same with, we do background checks on almost every type of profession where there's a power imbalance between the parties. Right.
So why not coaching? We have this, I just find that weird. I understand that it is expensive. It costs $20 per background check. But background checks are sort of like on a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's sort of step one. It's background checks, they only pick up what happens to somebody criminally, if they've either been charged or if they've been arrested or if they've been convicted of a criminal crime. The vast majority of those that abuse children never see a day in criminal court.
Right.
So it's actually not even, it's going to pick up the worst of the worst. What I call a bad molester. A bad molester is somebody who grabs a kid, pulls them into the weight room, and fondles them or whatever. That kid runs over to their parents and reports them, and they get sent to prison. A good molester develops a relationship with a child, with a family, with the community, so they all think this person's this really great guy. And then has access to children over and over and over and over again. So your average good molester, by the time they hit prison, has molested, 100 kids.
Right. And we know the research shows that the vast majority of individuals who perpetrate sexual assault of any kind are people that we know, right? So it's very infrequently the person that grabs you and pulls you into the weight room or pulls you off the street. And so then that just creates additional barriers for folks coming forward. And then in an unregulated system where there's no recourse, it's just compounding problem in terms of supporting survivors of these experiences in any comprehensive way.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. In 2014, I represented 19 victims of sexual abuse in the sport of swimming. And we did it because Chuck Wildest, at that time he was the executive director of the United States Swimming, and he knew about all these molesters running around the country and did nothing about it. And so he was slated to go into the Hall of Fame, and these these victims, along with 29 other, what I would call the stalwarts of swimming, said no, that he'd done such a bad job when it came to this issue that he should not be in the Hall of Fame. And let me tell you, because the victims didn't have the normal recourse of being able to go to court or being able to sue or being able to issue a demand letter or being able to get an apology. They couldn't get anything. That this was very powerful for all the victims to give them a voice as something to make sure that the sport was doing what it should be doing to weed out these some awful people in the sport.
And I think this comes back full circle to some of the themes that we've been talking about so far on Talking Point in the previous episodes around the system. And so you had talked about Champion Women being an organization that really tries to address some systemic inequities and the systemic prevalence of sexual abuse. And I think that that's an area that folks often struggle with, right? Particularly with sexual abuse, because the desire is to identify person A as a bad apple, and it's just this one person and they're deficient in some way, versus taking a step back and saying, you know what, this individual is part of a larger system, and the system is permissive to this kind of behavior because it's not regulated or it's not structured, or individuals in higher positions turn their back. They don't want to hear it. They disbelieve survivors. And so we have kind of a multitude of forces working on a system and a cultural level that create the conditions for sexual abuse to occur. I mean, the Me Too campaign right now obviously is not sport related per se, but it is demonstrating that there are industry upon industry where these same abuses of power are happening, and individuals are turning their back, or they're just saying it's this one person, let's just get rid of this one person and the problem will be solved. I don't know if you have a perspective on that.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I think the much harder lift of as you try to get change is to try to change a culture where the athlete is not able to say no. So right now we have Larry Nassar just yesterday was sentenced to 60 years in prison for molesting. The number that I've heard is 145 women and girls and women. And it's estimated it's going to cost Michigan State University $1 billion in civil settlements. And it's sort of like this has been sort of the tipping point, if you will, of all the sexual abuse. The reason why these women were so well sort of primed to be sexually abused is because, I mean, they had to go to work out and smile all the time. They had to. They didn't have any say over their own nutrition. They didn't have any say over whether or not they were really ready for a particular skill. They couldn't say, I'm about to get injured. I was a world-class athlete and I swam in the Olympics. And, between the ages of, I was world-class between the ages of 14 to 22. And after age 16, I never got injured. And the reason why is because I could say no to my coach. Right. There was a boundary of, I knew when my shoulder would start to click. It didn't really hurt, right? And so if an athlete doesn't have their own autonomy, if it's not a partnership between them, if it's a authoritarian relationship instead of an authoritative relationship, you're likely to not just see all kinds of bad things happen. I mean, injury and getting sick, as well as sexual abuse. One of the things Larry Nassar preyed on was there was this dour, harsh, judgmental atmosphere that was going on within the gym, and he would be the nice guy, and he would be the one that said, here's some candy, and he would be the right. And so they didn't want to lose that. And and it also seemed like, well, how could he be molesting me if everybody's giving him such praises and says they're so lucky to be able to have him, right? But changing, as you were saying earlier, Lisa, the hard part is changing a system that when the athletes go in, it's not a dour experience for them, that they do have autonomy and their own boundaries that happen between coach and athlete. That right now, coaches are used to near Weinstein-like power over their athletes. They literally, they can control whether or not they make a team, whether or not they get introduced to a college coach, whether or not they get scholarship money. It's on and on. I mean, they really can control a lot. And until that changes, until we recognize brand new boundaries between coaches and athletes, that you're going to keep having the same thing happen. As you said, it's not about just getting Larry Nassar out. It's not one person. It's how you have systemic change in sport so that athletes are not so vulnerable to sexual abuse.
And then also, creating the environment where if something occurs, it feels safe and supportive to come forward and say that this doesn't feel right. I mean, that's the other piece of it. We think about how many individuals don't say anything, and then years later they come forward, and the backlash kind of from the general public is that can't have happened, because if it had happened, you would have said something in the moment. And that really kind of identifies how little I think our culture, our community really understands sexual abuse, and the way in which power that you just described kind of manifests, particularly in that coach-athlete relationship. And if the coach is a guy and the athlete is a young woman, there's certainly a whole level of manipulation that happens in that context.
Yeah, the manipulation can happen in a number of ways. And let me just go over three of them that I have seen frequently. One is in the sport of swimming, there were a lot of marriages between coaches and athletes, usually right around the time that the athlete turned 18. And it was normalizing abuse that had been happening for years before then. Right. And what a marriage, or what a quote unquote relationship, let's say she's 25, does is it normalizes it. It makes it seem like that the only thing that's wrong between a coach-athlete, quote unquote, relationship is the age issue, and that's not it. The rule is coaches shall not have romantic and sexual relationships with the athletes that they coach, regardless of age or consent, because if the 25-year-old gets married, when the 12-year-old is kissed, she thinks it's true love. She thinks that she's headed down the altar, and she knows that it's inappropriate because of age, but that's sort of like titillating, hee. I'm so much more mature than your average 12-year-old. That's what they get told all the time. So I should be able to, to have this my parents just don't understand. As opposed to if everybody understood that rule from a young age as to what the appropriate boundaries are. Your coach will never text you individually. A good coach, an ethical coach, will never close the door, will never be alone with you. And so you can go down the list as to how do you establish those boundaries without having some kind of birds and bees discussion. You can protect kids pretty well by having them know, like, when boundaries get violated long before you get to any sexual touching. I mean, the abuser has to do that. Okay, so that's way number one, is we got this cultural way. Two is that when I can't even tell you how many times I've seen this happen, is when the sexual relationship is discovered, that the team rallies again on the side of the coach, and they want the athlete out. So all the rest of the team is like, well, we're perfectly happy with this coach. It's just you that has this problem here. So they want the kid gone, not the athlete gone. And then third is, a lot of times, look, families for very legitimate reasons don't want their kids to be subject to the police department. They don't want their kid to be subject to cross-examination. They just feel like they're too young, too vulnerable. They've already been through this terrible sexual abuse type situation. And so they really just want the coach to go away. The coach is allowed to go away, but the coach then gets hired right down the street. And so it doesn't solve the problem of, like, there's no reporting, there's no list that's kept, there's nothing to keep that coach from, going out and abusing again and again and again and again. Yeah.
that is troubling, right? Because that also speaks to this, again, the cultural permissiveness around an individual's behavior. Well, we'll just take them out of that environment and we'll put them somewhere else. There's not an acknowledgement of how is this environment within which this coach has behaved this way kind of supported what they're doing, right? And you saw that with the Catholic Church also, with priests that were moved around and around, right? And then the massive scandal and a huge cover-up. And so there are these similar themes, and they're happening across industries and across professions repeatedly. And at some point you have to ask, like, what is it going to take, right? What is it going to take before there is a tipping point, before there's a shift? And so there's certainly been stuff in the media right now around that, perhaps now with the Me Too campaign, with all of the stuff that's coming out around senators and Congress people, that this is that moment. And I don't know if you have a perspective about whether you believe that we're in this space where we're going to tip and something cultural is actually going to shift around understanding and addressing sex assault, sexual abuse, sexual harassment.
Yeah, I do think it is a tipping point. However, I understand that it's not like a moment, that it is a marathon, that it's like the kinds of questions that you were just sort of alluding to is like, why didn't they say something sooner? It's the culture has to understand why they didn't say something sooner.
Right.
We have terrible laws dealing with statutes of limitations that really, usually usually in most states it's between 2 and 4 years, and most kids by the time they're 22 years old, they're just not ready yet. And I would say the average age of the person that calls my office is 40. And they may have very tangible evidence of sexual abuse. They may have letters, they may have video, there may be photos, they may have lots of evidence that it happened, but because we have these arbitrary statutes of limitations, they can't do anything criminally, they can't do anything civilly. And so a lot of times all they want from our office, from Champion Women, is how do I get this coach out? How do I make an example of them? And so, that's what we do, is we try to do everything we can to get that coach out.
One of the things you had said earlier around boundaries, I just wanted to circle back to that. I think that's a really important piece, because one of the struggles, I think, culturally, particularly for young girls, is understanding that they have autonomy over their body, right? That they get to say who does and does not touch them, even down to things like, we're in the holiday season, right? And I think back on how many families force their children to sit on Santa's lap. Santa, Joe Schmo random in a shopping mall, a dude, right? And so then you're putting young children, because the family wants a cute picture. And so the implicit message in things like that, with hug your grandma, kiss your aunt, all those, is that you don't get to control who you engage with intimately. And so from a very, very young age, we are sending this message both within the family, within our communities, and in the larger culture, that your body is not your own. Yeah. And so then these young girls and boys enter athletics in whatever form that is. And so their kind of bodily autonomy has already been corrupted.
Yeah, I would even take it earlier. So in our family, I have 3 kids, and in our family, the kids, even like tickling or roughhousing or wrestling or, any of that kind of stuff. And we would kind of make a joke out of it. Like I would always say, like, it's your body, kids. And so if I'm massaging, I give my kids a deep tissue massage every night before they go to sleep. Like, if I'm not doing it right, or if you don't want it or whatever, it's your body. So sometimes, like my son, when he was little, he used to go like, it's my body, and kind of goof with me in that way. But it's like hands off, it's his body. And like we'll do smushy kisses at night. So like where like you smush into the cheek, and again, sometimes they're just not into it. And if they're not into it, then it is. I make a big point out of saying like that you get to choose on what happens to your body, and so there are lots of ways that we as parents and non-coaches can reinforce that message that their body is their own. And Yeah, if you can do some research online, there's different kinds of relationships with children. One is authoritarian and one is authoritative. And authoritarian parents want to tell their children how to feel, how to think. You know, they really want to sort of make little mini-me's or perfect little, right? But it's a top-down type relationship as opposed to an authoritative relationship. Certainly has the wisdom and authority and whatnot, but it's a collaborative. It's much more of a recognition that this person has their own walk with God, their own life path that has nothing to do with you. That has right, and but it's much more. Working together. It's much more, it's not just telling somebody, here's how you're supposed to feel about something, letting them have their own emotions.
Right. It's more of a partnership with some limitations, I suppose. Right. So one of the things I know that Champion Women is doing and that you're spearheading is some changes at the federal level and trying to pass a law that creates some regulation and some structures and parameters around adjudication of abuse within athletics in particular. I think one of the provisions of the law is publishing a list of individuals who have been sanctioned. And so I was wondering if you would share a little bit about the progress that this is happening and how you're hoping that this federal law will shift the culture, kind of what we've been talking about.
Sure. Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. Some of the gymnasts went to Senator Feinstein and talked to her about the lack of their power within sport and how that United States Gymnastics and the United States Olympic team did not protect them from a raging pedophile. I mean, he had thousands and thousands of images of violent child pornography on his computer, as well as he was abusing all these girls, and how they really didn't have a voice. They really couldn't do anything about it, and how they tried to, but okay. So she wrote this really great piece of legislation from the Judiciary Committee that really protected athletes. So it does a couple things that are important to point out. One is everybody in youth sports, not just the Olympic Committee, but in youth sports, as long as the entity competes in interstate competition, so any travel teams or, that's most sports teams, they have a mandatory duty to report. So just like teachers do, just like emergency room physicians and pediatricians, it's not a question, and you can have a jail time if you don't do it. So rather than waiting and seeing like, well, I'm not really sure if that's what happened, it's a mandatory report of sexual abuse. Two is the statute also, it makes it easier for plaintiffs to be able to sue those that molest them. Okay, so not the United States Swimming or United States Taekwondo, not those entities or the AAU, but the person who actually molested them. And third is, believe it or not, the legal strategy for the Olympic Committee, the Olympic movement in general, has been to say we don't owe a legal duty that extends to this kid. It's just not our job. We don't do that. And what the statute does is it says very clearly, it is your job. You have to figure out, you have to educate your members. You need to have a way to report within the system, within the sports system, to be able to report. You have to investigate. You've got to sanction sexually abusing coaches. You got to get them out of sport. And the legal duty part, when you think of Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, YMCA, Special Olympics, Police Athletic League, virtually every other youth-serving organization has already accepted this legal duty. It's rather shocking that only in sports that we don't have a legal duty that extends to kids. And I'm not quite sure why that is grown up that way. That leaves these, we're talking millions of kids virtually unprotected.
Right.
So anyway, so the statute does that. Senator Thune, who is in charge of the Commerce Committee that oversees the Ted Stevens Olympic and Amateur Sports Act, that's the statute that governs the Olympic movement. he got involved and said, well, let's do even more. So they're going to give money to this new organization called Safe Sport. So it's a separate independent entity that is going to do the training and do the investigating and sanctioning. When you think of the independence that the United States Anti-Doping Agency, as soon as it got independence, they used to have about 4 positive drug tests a year. And as soon as they had independence, there was about 45 positive drug tests a year. That's what independence gets you. There's no way United States Cycling is going to sanction Lance Armstrong by itself because he's their moneymaker, right? It's the same thing of like Larry Nassar is so popular inside of gymnastics that there's just no way United States Gymnastics is going to go against sort of one of their own, right? So it authorizes Safe Sport. It gives them money, and it also gives them protection from defamation lawsuits. So let's say somebody gets kicked out of sport, okay, and they want to sue. They say, you did it wrong, or you defamed me by saying I'm a sexual predator. And so unless they act with actual malice, which is a legal term meaning sort of prosecutorial misconduct, right? Unless you sort of willfully out to get somebody, they're not going to be able to bully a national governing body into letting them back into the sport. And I have to tell you, that happens quite a bit, is the bullies win.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it's passed the Senate, and they reconciled Senator Feinstein and Senator Thune, and I have to get Senator Blumenthal's name in there as well. Is very, very helpful. And they got everything worked out, and then shifting it now over to the House. The House needs to pass it. They passed something very similar with almost a unanimous vote. Let's keep our fingers crossed that this is going to pass the House.
And do you have a timeline on when that's likely to happen?
I don't. It doesn't have an HR number yet. It is Senate Bill 534, and it's called Protecting Young Athletes from Sexual Abuse Act. But as soon as it gets the number, hopefully it'll get fast tracked, and I mean, because this has been sort of a long process, it has allowed the Olympic Committee is supportive of this. The national governing bodies, the independent entity Safe Sport is in favor of it. We, Champion Women, we have a letter that I gave you that has 7 pages of 10-point font, single-spaced, 2 columns of sign-ons from elite athletes, from victims, from coaches, from sport leaders, from experts in sexual abuse in general, experts in general in sexual abuse. And we did that in part because, not that we needed all those sign-ons, but we wanted to let all the stakeholders know about what was happening. It was an opportunity for us to educate them, because something that I know from dealing with other statutes like Title IX or the Amateur Sports Act is that really getting legislation passed is step one. To really protect kids, it's a heavy lift to do what you and I, Lisa, were just talking about, this cultural change. Yeah. Right? Having the coaches not having absolute authority over their athletes, of recognizing boundaries between them. So that's a longer term project to make sure that happens.
And do you see this bill as really integral in that long-term marathon project?
Yeah, I think it's essential, because I don't think that, particularly the part about the legal duty. So if I can just take a couple minutes here to kind of explain the concept of duty to everybody out there. If you and I are crossing the street and I can see very clearly that you're about to get hit by a car, and very easily I can stop you from getting hit by a car, but I don't do anything, you can't sue me because I don't owe you a duty to keep you safe. right? So even it could have been easy and I should have done it and morally certainly should have done it, okay? As opposed to, let's say that now I say, here, Lisa, let me help you walk across the street, okay? And I do a bad job of it. You get hit by a car, same accident, same amount of harm that happens. You can now sue me because I did a bad job of helping you across the street, okay? So now I'll get this back to athletics. By giving the national governing body a legal duty, what you're saying is you have to do it and you can't do it poorly to protect athletes from sexual abuse. So you need to train coaches and athletes and their family members and everybody, and it's a new world out there as to right what the rules are going to be, and I really think a lot of the reason why athletes have such right now are not being protected is because the United States Olympic Committee and all the different sports were more concerned about civil liability than they were about keeping athletes safe. They wanted to protect their own hide more than they wanted to. They've all known this is a very big problem in sports, and so once this attaches, they're just not going to be able to ignore it. Their insurance company's not going to allow them to ignore it. So, and I would say the biggest change that needs to happen, and you know, you as a coach, I'm interested to hear what you think about this, but you know, I've done a lot of trainings, and you know, I've participated in a lot of trainings, and the one message that needs to get across to every child, parent, coach, everybody is coaches shall not have romantic and sexual relationships with the athletes they coach, regardless of age or consent. There's a bright line rule there. It's the same rule that goes for doctors and lawyers and family members and counselors and religious leaders, and right. It's right. No different from lots of other places. Well, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's great. I'm thinking back to I went through USA triathlon training, and I had to do a safe sport webinar that was several chapters long about what is and is not sexual harassment and sexual abuse. I mean, for me, like my professional life is knee deep in addressing sexual assault, and so it was not new information for me. But a number of the trainee coaches in my cohort had identified that it was very educational for them. And so on the one hand, I'm like, great, you learned something. And on the other hand, I'm thinking, why do you not know this, right? Because some of the stuff that was in there felt so self-evident and obvious, in that, you know, blatant things like, you know, do not touch one of your athletes inappropriately without their consent. Very, very what I perceive to be extremely basic rules, you know, or basic, you know, not even like legally, just respectfully. Right. And so I thought that was fascinating, kind of an observation that there were a significant number of people who were uneducated on some of these areas. And so,
you know, let me just push back a little bit on just the one thing that you said, which was that they didn't know they couldn't touch somebody inappropriately without somebody's consent. I mean, you can get consent from a 5-year-old. I mean, a good molester can get consent. I mean, a good molester has to get consent in order to be able to do it over and over and over again, right? So
yes, I suppose. I mean, I think about consent differently. I would say, like, you could manipulate a 5-year-old into giving consent, but it's not really consent because the 5-year-old doesn't truly understand what that means.
Right. But yeah, and that's my point, is that I don't even talk about consent when it comes to children, because first of all, legally, it's true. They're not legally able to consent. My husband had a United States Supreme Court case. He got to argue in front of all the judges about the issue of whether or not you can put somebody to prison for the rest of their life when they didn't kill anybody, right? Who's a minor. Can you put a minor? And all this brain research I learned as he was going through the process of what's the difference between a 17-year-old's brain and a 21-year-old brain. Holy tamale, is it? And the law reflects those differences, right? So somebody may be physically developed and they may look much older, but their brain development is is something entirely different. I have a 17-year-old right now, and I can tell you, you know what, I remember I thought I was so mature at age 17, but I look at him, who's such a great kid, but really doesn't. But in my, when you say touch inappropriately, I would say that regardless of age or consent, you just don't touch inappropriately.
Yeah. I think my language choice wasn't great there. I totally 100% agree with what you're saying.
Okay.
It was more kind of, I was just surprised that these, what I perceived to be fairly basic boundaries between coach and athlete was a new learning for many of my triathlete coach cohort members. And to varying degrees, I did not have an at-length conversation, but I know that the folks, you know, who are running the show asked if it was helpful, and a lot of people were like, yeah, I learned new things and right? So, you know, so that was really interesting to me. And primarily the coaches in the room would not even necessarily be working with young people, like under 18. They, a lot of them are working with individuals who are doing Ironman and various long course triathlons, right? So primarily adults. But then I think that's also really interesting and goes back to your point about what do I think about the relationship piece, is I agree. I mean, I think there is a boundary there, and whether or not your athlete is quote unquote consenting to a relationship, that's a line that you shouldn't cross as a coach.
Exactly.
But then you think about the employment, right? And so there are lots of employment rules and regulations within an organization that say a supervisor and a supervisee can be in a relationship together. We just have to sever that supervisor-supervisee relationship. Like, you can't then be supervising your partner, right?
Right. You cannot have power over them.
Exactly. So I think that why then can these same principles that exist in all these other places not be applicable to the field of athletics and coaching, right? So I fully support changes in that area. And it is odd to me that it's taken so long, and it is odd to me that coaching is somehow perceived as different or should be excluded from some of these rules because of, I mean, I don't even know what a legitimate argument would be.
But
you know,
let me bring up two scenarios of adults and bad things that can happen. One is when this happened on the Olympic volleyball team, when one of the coaches was having a relationship with one of the athletes. She started getting preferential treatment, started getting more playing time and special skill training, and he spent more time with her and everything else. So what it did was it set up the other athletes of thinking, if I want to succeed in my sport, I need to provide the same sexual favors that this other athlete is doing. So it really kind of messed up the whole team dynamics, number one. Number two is there are situations, Eva Radowski was a speed skater, and her biggest competitor for making the Olympic spot was having a relationship with Mike Crow, who was the head coach. He was the decider on who was going to get to be on the Olympic team, and he protected his paramour. He protected the person he was having a relationship with, and Eva never made an Olympic team. And that is just sad beyond words. But that's when we talk about the kind of power that a coach has. It doesn't just affect the two people that are in that relationship. You know, that they may. I'm sure that Mike Crow and the person he was having the relationship with, they had no complaints whatsoever. But the people around them also can be affected by those relationships, and that's another reason why they're unethical.
Yeah, and I think it all comes back to me around this abuse of power and what and how do we successfully and effectively address abuse of power, whether it's in sport, whether it's in Hollywood, whether it's in institution of higher education, where individuals, many times men, are exerting authority or power or manipulation over individuals who are beholden to them in one way or another because of that power relationship. That's the larger question And I think that's the question that very frequently gets missed, because we always come back to that bad apple. It's just this one person, and let's just get rid of them and everything will be fine, versus let's look systemically and culturally at the ways in which we construct these relationships, and then also the ways in which we construct masculinity, or we construct femininity, and we engage with these narratives. I think that that's a huge piece of it.
I could not agree more. No, it's a much bigger conversation than just getting that one bad apple out. I mean, if I post something about sexual abuse on my Facebook page, I can guarantee you the first 3 responses. The first one is going to be kill him. Second response is going to be take off his testicles. The third response is going to be put him in prison forever. And let me tell you, none of those 3 things are ever going to happen. Never going to happen, right? It allows somebody to emotionally vent, but it doesn't actually, it doesn't make it safer for kids. Even if you put this one person away, it doesn't, right? It requires actual thinking about it. Like when I give talks, I have to move people from the emotional part of their brain into the thinking part of their brain, like the strategy part of their brain, because people get so freaked out about the idea of children, adults, sex. No, it's too much, right? That they can't come up with effective strategies that will actually make kids safer, that will have, as you were talking about, these conversations about masculinity and about systemic changes to sport and realign the coach-athlete relationship.
Yeah, and you just triggered something else in my head. I teach a graduate class on human sexuality, and we often have conversations about sex education in the United States and how problematic and poor it is. Also unregulated, really not particularly structured. And so you have young people who are both perhaps not getting clear messages around boundaries because of the Santa and because of the grandma, right? And then they're also not getting good comprehensive sex education to understand developmentally, like what is and is not appropriate. And again, those reinforced messages around bodily autonomy. And so it's just feels like this big ocean of problems. And so the bill that you're championing is certainly one way to attack it, right? Background checks are another way, like education and training is another way, actually holding people accountable for their behaviors and not blaming the victims for the perpetrator's behaviors, right? It's all part of this larger conversation that I sometimes just feel like we never get to, and is in part the intention of this podcast is to dive a little deeper so that we can kind of pull the rug out from under some of these experiences and cultural norms that people just don't question very often, right?
Yep. Yeah. If we were much better at addressing improper boundaries right at the early stages, the first time that a coach, first of all, an athlete has got to have somebody that they trust, that they can go to, that they can report this to, and the first time that they are texted inappropriately, that they can report that before anything else happens. First time that they are given a present, coaches should not be giving, and you can train a 6-year-old that your coach should never give you a present. That's just not something that an ethical coach will do. And if I'm giving that message out to little kids, I want the coach, who's typically a really great guy, standing next to me, nodding his head vigorously to say and reinforce that, for the rest of your life, your coach should not be giving you presents, right? All the things that you do to set up kids to be abused is you can really give a kid an inoculation if they are given this kind of bodily autonomy and also appropriate boundary relationships at an early age. And again, you don't need to have the birds and the bees conversation with them. You don't need to be talking about sex or intercourse, or you don't need to be doing any of that, but you certainly want to give them tools that will help them long before you get to the conversation about good touch, bad touch.
Right. And then that can help young people and adults alike identify problematic behavior or a pattern of behavior that maybe hasn't yet manifested into physical touch, but is laying the groundwork. Because I think some folks are like, well, it was just this one mistake, right? No, a mistake is, leaving my cup of coffee on the top of my car and driving off, right? That's a mistake. Like a mistake is not sexually abusing someone, right? And thinking about this as a long-term set of behaviors that pave the way and then create the conditions for the physical abuse to occur. And it's, it starts with a comment, it starts with a gift, it starts with a little nudge here and there. And
right.
So it's not like I didn't just trip up and assault someone, But I would even say, like, I want coaches to suffer consequences and to be called on the carpet, and to really, the first time that they text another athlete individually, there's no reason for them to be texting individually. Right? Yeah, like it needs to get addressed at the front end, at the very beginning of the behavior, the unethical behavior that manifests. That's when it needs to get addressed, not 15 years down the road. Oh, you sexually abused 17 girls on the gymnastic team. That's too late. I mean, it needs to still happen, but it's not. That could have all been prevented if people had been paying attention. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time today to talk this through and kind of like delve a little deeper into some of the structures and systems and problems that exist specifically for women and girls and boys in sport around sexual abuse and sexual harassment. We wish you a lot of luck with your federal bill and hope that it gets through the House as quickly as you anticipate that it will.
Yes, I hope so. If anybody wants to hear more, please go to our, we have a very active Facebook page, Champion Women. We also have a website, championwomen.org.
Great. And folks can sign up on your website for updates, right? They can learn about progress and the advocacy that you're doing and get in ways to get involved in this movement.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And donations. Where the lifeblood of any nonprofit's work is to be able to have donations. You can make them right there on our website.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece. Is that a lot of entities doing this work across the country, trying to address sexual harassment, sexual abuse, or women and girls equity, gender equity, often really struggle for support for many of the reasons we discussed. So if you're able to support Champion Women or organizations like that in any way, whether that's $5 or telling your friends about it or supporting the Facebook page, then we certainly encourage you to do so, because it does take a village to get some of these shifts. Yeah.
It really does. It's a big team.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Nancy. We really appreciate the time you took today to talk to us.
This was really enjoyable. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be able to reach more people about this issue. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, great. Well, check out Champion Women, www.championwomen.com. Is that right?
.org.
.org, sorry.
Yeah.
We hope that we will be able to learn a lot more about what's happening in your world, Nancy, as things progress for you.
All right. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thanks again to Nancy Hogshead-Makar for sharing her perspectives and expertise about the challenges women and girls encounter in sports, particularly as it relates to sexual abuse. We're very excited to have her on the show and for her to share her wealth of information and experience. And as we had mentioned, you can learn more about the work that she does at www.championwomen.org, and information about the work that she does will also be in the show notes. For more conversations from the world of women's sports, you can go to wispsports.com. Talking Point can be found at that same location and on WiSP Sports Radio, which is available on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play, all for download to your local podcast player. With over 700 episodes across 30 unique shows and a global audience of 1.5 million, WiSP Sports Radio is the world's largest network of podcasts for women's sport. Thank you so much for tuning in this month to Talking Point. You can access this specific podcast online, like I just shared, and you can also reach us for comments and ideas at info@wispsports.com. You can also reach me directly at TryToDefy on Twitter or on Instagram. We look forward to hearing from you.